This is Cast of Wonders, the young adult fiction podcast featuring stories of the fantastic. Merry Christmas, episode 225 for December 25th, 2016. You're listening to Little Wonders, our thematic flash fiction collections. For the holidays this year, we're bringing you comfort food, a culinary pairing just perfect alongside cozy fireplaces and mince pies, brought to you by authors and narrators from the EA family. Our first story is The 4 Stewpots by D.K. Thompson, forthcoming in his collection And Welcome Back. Dave Thompson is a good name to know if you spend any time around the escape artists. So is California King, or Easter Werewolf. He's a pretty awesome guy, even if he disparages pumpkin beer. He lives outside Los Angeles with his wife and 3 terribly photogenic children. While he can tweet up to 175 characters, he refrains from using this power for chaos. Together with co-editor Anna Schwind, he ran Podcastle for 5 years before stepping down to focus on his own writing in 2015. As I mentioned, this story is forthcoming in Dave's first collection, And Welcome Back, which he successfully kickstarted last year. You can find 2 of his audiobook narrations on Amazon, Norse Code by Greg Van Eekhout and Briarpatch by Tim Pratt. We'll have links for you to Dave's website and Twitter account in the show notes. Your narrator for this story is Tina Connolly. Tina is the author of the Ironskin trilogy from Tor Books and the Seriously Wicked series from Tor Teen. Ironskin, her first fantasy novel, was a Nebula finalist, and her stories have appeared in Lightspeed, Tor.com, Strange Horizons, Beneath Sleepless Skies, and many more. Her narrations have appeared in audiobooks and podcasts, including Podcastle, Pseudopod, Beneath Sleepless Skies, and her Parsec-winning flash fiction podcast, Toasted Cake. We'll have a link for you to Tina's website and Twitter account in the show notes. What's that old adage? The best gifts? Oh, they come in small packages.
The 4 Stewpots by D.K. Thompson. Review: The 4 Stewpots by Darcy E. 14 friends, 27 reviews. 1 star out of 5. I've been coming to Uptown for the past year, since getting a new job and moving to Whittier, and somehow had never seen the 4 Stewpots before. I'm actually not a stew fan. I like my food fresh. Soup is okay, some days. Stew? Blah. It's been sitting for ages. This place actually suggests one pot they have is 1,000 years old. Bon appetit? But my daughter's first report card had come home from junior high. She'd done exceptionally well. She wants to be an astronaut, a monster makeup artist, a superhero, a cryptozoologist, or a cartographer of parallel universes. And whatever she decides to do, she'll be brilliant, and so as a reward I let her pick. She saw the 4 Stewpots as we were driving down the street, right next to Undercity Comics, and demanded we go there. Again, I do not like stew, but I am a supportive and proud mother who wants to encourage my daughter's academic achievements and realize that it's not always about me, at least until it's time to write the Yelp review. It is time to write the Yelp review. Sadly, this establishment did not change my opinion of stew in general, or give me hope for specific nouveau reinventions that managed to somehow subvert the stereotypical sludge. TLDR, it was a horrific, terrifying experience, and not just in the presentation of the food. It almost ruined my life, and certainly warped my daughter's. The 4 Stewpots is allegedly a themed restaurant where the hosts and servers all dress up. But I couldn't tell you what the theme was. Cosmic hodgepodge pub for cosplayers, maybe? The decor consisted of maps of places I didn't recognize. On the ceiling, an enormous X was painted by hand in red around a mixture of glow stars, planets, and layered maps that were torn apart and pasted together with the legend, "You are here." Wow. Thank you for not letting me forget 4 Stewpots, no matter how hard I might have tried. My daughter adored the costumes the staff wore and asked them where they'd originated from. The hostess was covered in black leather from neck to toes and had short spiked silver hair, black raccoon-like makeup around her eyes, and some kind of mechanized membrane-webbed wings that fluttered and looked completely organic. Our waiter wore an impressive mask with elephantine ears and a large snout. Rows of ridiculously jagged and yellow rubber teeth filled her mouth, and her pale, sleeveless arms looked like circuitry pumped through her veins. The bartender looked like a reject from a punk rock rendition of Oliver, with his Dickensian coat and trousers and purple mohawk. His shirt was unbuttoned halfway down his chest, and I could make out the trace of something like a giant spider horse tattooed there. He wore goggles on his forehead and spent the entire time drinking and texting furiously on his phone while casually twisting an old wood and brass ship's wheel. They were polite, but had funny accents and dazed expressions. The menu attempts to be imaginative, but is lacking. There's a big explanation on the back as to why the options are limited. Warning, understatement. Because preparing stews for an unknown number of people is an impossibility, blah, blah, blah. The long and short of it are, you have 4 Stewpot options. Stewmaster Sea Serpent Supreme, Dragon Scale Delight, The Great Nameless Stewing Evil, and Spicy Space Slug Sludge. Only one of them, The Great Nameless Evil, is vegetarian. 1. My daughter smiled and said, "See, Mom, they have stuff for you." No, sweetie. I didn't say then, but will punctuate now with all caps. N-O, no. A single option is really not any kind of option at all. It is a distinct lack of options. As a result, I ordered the evil, but only stirred the black sludge around once it arrived. I drank a glass of red, the vineyard under the mountain, never heard it before, mediocre, and ate the fresh, crusty bread, surprisingly warm, though a bit hard. My daughter, on the other hand, has always been an adventurous eater. Her bowl of sea serpent claimed to have wild leviathan meat, as well as okra, zucchini, tomatoes, basil, and garlic. Of course, when I asked what the meat really was, the server flicked her Dumbo-like ear and repeated, "Leviathan?" As if it were obvious. I persisted, and eventually asked for the manager, who was apparently on her lunch break. I would have made a bigger issue of it. Such customer service is appalling. But we were supposed to be celebrating my daughter, who mumbled an apology to the waitress, then got up from the table to look at all the maps that littered the walls. When the food arrived, thankfully it didn't take long, the menu explains why, it smelled like a mermaid had died in it centuries ago. My daughter, whom at this point I think reveled in my distress, wolfed it down and gave a loud belch. She urged me to get a takeout container for my evil. While she finished a second bowl, "You get free refills, apparently, just in case you haven't had enough." She excused herself to wipe off some stew she'd spilled on her t-shirt, belching all the way to the restroom. She hadn't been gone long enough to let the water warm when she dashed back out, whooping and shouting. I jumped to my feet, ready to discover and throttle whatever had frightened her, when I realized how different she looked. An odd tri-cornered hat sat crooked on her head. Her face was covered with grime, and she wore red-ribbed leather vest, boots, and had a plastic sword hilt, no blade, strapped to her hip. She clutched what looked suspiciously like a flintlock and waved it at the bathroom. I realized she must have found the treasure chest or toy box the restaurant kept for children. Yes, this restaurant gives children toy guns. I tried to rise above it. Sweetie, you're a little old for toys, and you know we don't play with pretend weapons. Mom, have you paid already? Hurry up! Adolescence. I had not paid, and reached for my purse, when she slapped down a handful of odd marbles on the table and pushed me toward the door. Something roared from the bathroom. Large but cheap-looking plastic lobster claws and tentacles pushed open the door, and the restaurant lights flickered. Apparently, we had taken some interdimensional portal and ended up at the Rainforest Cafe, OMG. My daughter lifted the toy gun and pulled the trigger. It didn't make a noise, just flashed a little. But the claws and tentacles disappeared back into the bathroom with a whine, clearly on some kind of timer system. That was when my daughter's hat fell off, and I saw what was left of her long curly hair now lopped off at her shoulders. Who, in the name of all that's holy, ruined your hair? I demanded. I will destroy them. A pirate from Undertow, she said, and twirled her flintlock. Not me. Put that back this instant. She complied, throwing the flintlock at the bartender, still crouched over his phone, but managed to bat it down behind the countertop. Useless now anyway, she said, and pulled me out the door. I admit I let her keep the plastic sword hilt fastened to her hip. I didn't see what damage she could do without any blade. You can see why I don't plan on going back. Oddly, I've driven by a couple times to express my fury to the manager, but it seems like it's closed down. The sign is up, but the lights are off. Good riddance. 1 star, though I am severely tempted to find a way to rank it lower. That said, I must admit, despite all the trauma, my daughter can't stop talking about riding a giant sea turtle, fighting clockwork dragons, and pirate gorillas. Or gorillas. I can't figure out what movie this stems from, or what book she has been reading, but I suppose whatever was in her stew must have been good for her imagination. Her hair, of course, has not yet grown back. My box of evil remains safely in the refrigerator where I left it, continuing to sit and solidify for the next 1,000 years.
As I write this episode commentary, there's a slow cooker working away in my kitchen, filled with tomatoes, garlic, beans, potatoes, and chorizo, the Spanish kind. Affectionately nicknamed pig soup in my house, it's the perfect spicy, warm combination to fend off impending winter sniffles. There's just something about soup that conjures feelings of simplistic, homey comfort. And yet, with soup, there's always room for experimentation. A substituted ingredient here, a bold new approach there. Freedom for self-expression up against a backstop of tradition and support. I can't think of a better culinary analogy for adolescence. Having filled our stomachs with warm soup, let's move on to the next course. Her Path Lay Forward by Shane Halbach is a Cast of Wonders original. Shane Halbach lives in Chicago with his wife and 3 kids, again, terribly photogenic, where he writes software by day and avoids writing stories by night. His story Downsizing Pluto appeared in Cast of Wonders episode 106 all the way back in December 2013. Additionally, his fiction has appeared in Analog, Escape Pod, The Year's Best YA Speculative Fiction, and elsewhere. He blogs regularly at shanehalbach.com or can be found on Twitter, both of which we'll link for you in the show notes. For your narrator, we welcome back the fantastic M.K. Hobson, who has switched things up recently. While she continues to write, she's been dallying with a newfound love of photography. She's also been traveling quite a bit, and as a matter of fact, today's story was recorded at Timber House in Ottawa, an urban castle and creative paradise. Detailing all of MK's work in the escape artist's arena might take longer than the story itself, so we've linked to her EA Wikia page in the show notes, along with her social media links and her new Instagram page.
Her Path Lay Forward by Shane Halbach. "What do we do?" whispered Oliver. "What do we do? What do we do?" Tears continued to leak from his red-rimmed eyes. "We'll do what we must," said Agnes. She looked around at the remaining residents of Thistlepatch huddled in one of the few intact buildings. Most of the other buildings had been reduced to ash or smashed to kindling by the dragon. Slowly, Agnes rose to her feet. It was best she didn't sit too long anyway, or her back would lock up. "I will go to the dragon," she declared. There was a murmur of disbelief from the other villagers. "Grandmother, don't be foolish," said Evelyn. Agnes had known Evelyn's parents, gone some time now. Evelyn had children of her own. Before long, faster than she knew, Evelyn would be the one feeling the pain in her back and the wind in her bones. She would be the one they were calling grandmother. "Foolish," snapped Agnes. "Of course it's foolish. It's a God's damned dragon. It was foolish for Tom to go, and Bernard. It was foolish for Jasper. Just because they were strapping young men didn't make it any less foolish." "But, grandmother, at least they— And what choice do we have? Are any of you volunteering to go?" Agnes glared around at the villagers, but no one would meet her eye. "We do what we must," said Agnes. The day was bright and warm, and Agnes set out early. As she crossed the forest, she concentrated on the simple joys, maybe for the last time. The sounds of the birds in the maple trees, the crisp air, the sun on her face, the smell of pines and honeysuckle. She bent to gather herbs in the shady parts of the undergrowth, as she always did, as her mother had always done. Half a day out of town, Agnes's way was blocked by a wall of brambles. The immense patch of tight-knit thorns was deep and stretched between the trees for as far as Agnes could see in either direction. She knew all the way back to her childhood that there were no easy paths through, no shortcuts. Her path lay forward, and it would be uncomfortable. Using her woolen robe to shield her skin as much as possible, she plunged into the brambles, trampling them beneath her feet. Thorns drew hot lines across her hands and ankles until her blood ran from dozens of small cuts. She tugged her dress free from grasping branches and heard fabric tear and seams rip. Grimacing, she continued, crying out when the brambles ripped particularly deep. Finally, she was through. She sat on a rock to catch her breath. Moisture stung her eyes, but she ignored it, examining the bloodiest of the gashes. From a pocket in her robe, Agnes removed a small sewing kit and set to work, mending dress and skin alike with an experienced hand. As the elevation rose, Agnes had to stop more often for breaks. Though she was accustomed to walking, she had not walked an entire day in many years. Now that she was out onto the rockier ground of the foothills, her ankles were starting to ache. Evidence of the dragon surrounded her. There was no more birdsong here. Tree husks smoldered where the tops had been burned off. The taste of ash was in her mouth. Agnes longed to sit in her worn chair by the fire, drifting in and out of sleep. But she was close to the end now, and her path lay forward. Eventually, Agnes found a path of stones worn smooth, scoured by the dragon's passage. The path led to the edge of a steep cliff face, resuming, Agnes presumed, somewhere on the ground some 24 feet below. The dragon would no doubt have spread his wings and glided gracefully to the ground, but Agnes needed another way down. On the edge of the cliff was a small fir tree, with web-like roots trailing over the edge, reaching for the floor below. The wispy roots would never hold even her slight weight, but they trailed 3/4 of the way down the steep rock face. Agnes sat on the edge and braced her weary back against the tree. She gathered the longest roots and started braiding them into a sturdier cord. Her body was light and her arms strong from carrying water to the garden. When the cord was long enough, she would climb down. The path lay forward. She must go on. The dragon's black scales shone like polished steel, reflecting the last of the sun as it basked on the rocks before its lair. Wisps of smoke drifted from its nostrils, but it was not asleep. One enormous pupil cracked open at Agnes's approach. When the dragon saw the old woman making her way slowly toward him, he sat up in surprise, his head towering over her stooped body. The dragon's voice rumbled in Agnes's bones. "Is this who Thistlepatch sends to battle me?" "Nobody sent me. I volunteered," said Agnes. "I'm the only one who could do what the others could not." The dragon chuckled incredulously. "And what is it that you can do? Die? Don't you see how big I am? Don't you see my sharp teeth?" "My eyesight's not that good," snapped Agnes, sitting on a rock to rest her feet and hide her trembling. The dragon cocked his head curiously. "Aren't you frightened of me?" Agnes's bladder was in danger of letting go. She was as frightened as she had ever been in her life. More frightened than when Alphonse lay dying, leaving her alone and unprotected in a cruel world, not knowing how she would provide for their children. More frightened than when she had lain in bed waiting for word of her sons. As she always had before, she accepted the fear, but did not let it control her. "War took my 2 sons from me. Plague took my sister and my daughter-in-law. Old age took all my friends and neighbors. All you've taken from me is 1 grandson." The dragon rumbled in annoyance, his eyes narrowing to slits. "I don't need your fear and cowering. Afraid or not, you will not leave this clearing alive." Agnes stood and faced the dragon. Her voice quavered but grew stronger as she spoke, strengthening as she knew it was time to do what she had come for. "I am old and frail. I've lived and loved, grieved and lost, and seen all the death I've cared to. Time moves on, and I'll die as I lived, doing what I must." The dragon reared high above her, and as he did, Agnes reached into the pockets of her robes, bringing out the herbs that she had gathered along the way. Pokeweed and snakeroot and hemlock. How many times had she taught kids to identify them? Danger, she taught the little ones. Poison. She smiled and raised her hands as if to embrace a long-lost friend. The mighty dragon snapped her up in its jaws. It started to tilt its head back, but paused, catching the bitter taste of the hemlock. The dragon coughed and tried to spit Agnes from its mouth, but she was churning her legs, moving forward blindly, screaming in rage, crawling deeper into the beast's mouth. The dragon choked and shook its head, but he could not dislodge her. Deeper she crawled to the back of its mouth. It couldn't breathe, and Agnes pressed in the back of its throat. The dragon swallowed, drawing the poison into itself, sealing its own doom. In the end, as always, Agnes's path lay forward.
Well, it was a filling meal for the dragon, and dragons deserve holiday feasts too. Shane's own commentary explains why I love this story. He says his children were looking at the scorecard of a card game, and they were debating about the character facing down the dragon in the picture. I overheard their discussion. "It looks like an old woman," said my daughter. "No," said my son, "it must be a boy. An old woman can't fight a dragon." "An old woman can too fight a dragon. In fact, the more I thought about it," Shane says, "the more I thought an old woman was the perfect person to fight a dragon. Specifically, my grandmother, Agnes, is one of the strongest, most capable people I have ever met, and no matter how difficult a task she has been faced with in her life, she always does what needs done." Join us next week for
Wished by Amanda Helms. The wishing well discovered its meaning in existence only through a case of mistaken semantics. In point of fact, it started its existence not as a wishing well, but as a decorative fountain.
Cast of Wonders relies on your donations to pay our authors and to bring you the best in young adult audio fiction week after week. If you've enjoyed this story, please consider making a donation using the PayPal buttons available on our website. Every one-time, or even better, a reoccurring monthly subscription can make a huge difference, and you have, as always, our heartfelt thanks. You can share your appreciation for this story by leaving it a review on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts, sharing the episode with your family and friends, or discussing it on the EA forum, forum.escapeartists.net. We're at Cast of Wonders on Twitter. Come and say hello. Cast of Wonders is a production of Escape Artists Incorporated and is brought to you by the creative team of assistant editors Danny Daly and Catherine Inskip, along with our entire Slush Reading team. Your audio producer is Jeremy Carter, and I remain, as always, your humble editor and host, Marguerite Kenner. Our episodes are released under the Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 International License. You can share the episode or download it on any device you like, but you can't change it or sell it. The Little Wonders theme, Verses, is by Alexei Nov from musicalley.com. Thanks for listening, and from all of us to all of you, we wish you a bright festive season and the happiest of New Years.